Welcome to the Global WarWatch Network. You're tuning in for an essential look at a relationship that shapes not just Asia, but, well, the entire planet. Here's where it gets really interesting. Together, China and India make up more than a third of the world's population, and as their power grows, so does their rivalry. But, the big question is, are they headed toward cooperation, competition, or outright conflict? Today, we're taking an in depth look at the complex relationship between these two nuclear armed giants. We've poured through a stack of insights covering pretty much everything from their contested borders to their soaring economic ambitions, their formidable military might, and their intensifying battle for influence in the global south. Our mission today is really to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge to help you understand what's truly at stake and sort of unravel the intricate threads that define this crucial dynamic.
Yeah, it's remarkable how intertwined and multifaceted this relationship truly is. It really is. We'll be exploring precisely how their fundamentally differing views on the international order, China's desire for regional hegemony versus India's vision of a multipolar system, along with their competing geopolitical ambitions, how all that drives so much of this dynamic. And when we connect this to the broader global landscape, it becomes really clear why their interactions have such profound implications for security, the global economy, and, well, the future of international cooperation itself.
Okay, let's unpack this intricate geopolitical dance then. We'll examine the key areas where their paths diverge and their rivalries ignite, starting, I think makes sense, with their long-standing and deeply contentious border disputes, the global significance of China and India.
Right. But before we delve into those points of friction, let's maybe just set the stage first. Let's grasp the sheer global significance of these two nations. I mean, these aren't just any two countries. They're the two most populous globally. And in a significant demographic shift, India officially surpassed China as the most populous nation back in April 2023. Together, they now represent nearly 35% of the world's population. It's a staggering figure. It makes their actions and interactions incredibly impactful on, well, an unparalleled global scale.
Exactly. And this demographic scale isn't just a number. It translates directly into immense economic clout. It really does. As of April 2025, their combined gross domestic product by purchasing power parity, which adjusts for differences in costs, giving a more accurate comparison of output and living standards, well, that accounts for approximately 28% of the world's total, almost a third. China, of course, has been the largest exporter globally since 2009. It's cemented its position as the world's factory. And India, well, not to be outdone, is currently recognized as the world's fastest growing major economy. So this immense economic and political power, concentrated right there in the Indo-Pacific, it has far-reaching implications for international governance, for trade routes, diplomatic engagements. It's essentially defining the contours of global interactions for, well, decades to come.
And it's absolutely crucial to remember that this economic and demographic power is underpinned by serious military might. Both are nuclear powers, and they possess the world's largest and second largest militaries, respectively. That just adds a critical, almost chilling layer of strategic importance to every single interaction between them. Any friction, any escalation immediately carries a weight that reverberates across the entire international community. It demands careful observation, diplomatic dexterity.
Absolutely. And their relationship, more often than not, is primarily characterized by intense competition and deep-seated rivalry. This isn't some superficial clash. It's driven by fundamentally different, almost diametrically opposed views on the international order. China, for its part, desires a form of regional hegemony. It's aiming for a dominant position where it can effectively shape the rules and norms within its sphere of influence. Think of it like a gravitational pull, maybe. Where Beijing seeks to be the undisputed center, India, however, seeks a multipolar system where power is distributed among several major poles, including itself. The goal is ensuring no single nation can dominate the continent or dictate global terms. Consequently, India aims to avoid entanglement in the U.S.-China rivalry, meticulously maintaining its strategic autonomy. So this isn't just about economic growth or military strength. It's really about shaping the future global system itself. It reflects contrasting visions for international relations and, well, the distribution of global power, the enduring challenge of contested borders.
Okay, so let's go right to the heart of much of the friction. Their 2,100-mile shared border, known as the Line of Actual Control, or LAC. Now, this isn't a clearly defined, mutually agreed-upon international boundary, is it?
No, not at all. It's a de facto line that essentially emerged from the cessation of hostilities in the 1962 Sino-Indian War. The fact that it's poorly demarcated and frankly often ambiguous, is a major source of ongoing tension and repeated clashes.
And the origins of that 62 conflict. Pretty revealing, right?
They really are. It primarily began over China's construction of a highway, the Xinjiang-Tibet Highway, straight through the Aksai-Chin region. This was a highly strategic move for China. It provided a vital military and logistical link between Tibet and Xinjiang, both hugely important regions for Beijing. India perceived this as a direct challenge to its sovereignty over Aksai-Chin. So it responded by increasing troop deployments, setting up new outposts in what it considered its territory. This military escalation on both sides, that's what ultimately triggered the war. After the conflict, the LAC eventually became the de facto border. It was sort of formalized by a 1993 bilateral agreement, but the underlying territorial claims from both sides, they remain unresolved. And they continue to fuel deep mistrust. It's a persistent flashpoint. Plus, the sheer difficulty of physically demarcating a line across some of the world's most extreme high-altitude terrain, combined with a profound lack of consistent political will from both sides. It means this de facto status is likely to persist, just fueling continuous low-level tension.
And what specific territories are we talking about? Where are the most contentious points along this massive, unforgiving border?
Well, the two major sections that are still fiercely disputed today are Aksai-Chin and Arunachal Pradesh. Aksai-Chin is this vast, high-altitude desert wasteland, kind of nestled in the greater Kashmir area. It's currently administered by China, but claimed by India as an integral part of its Ladakh Union territory. China, for its part, has integrated it into both the Tibet and Xinjiang autonomous regions. That really underscores its strategic value for connectivity and control. Then there's Arunachal Pradesh, a large state in northeast India, which China claims entirely as Zangnan, or South Tibet. Beijing views it as part of its historical Tibetan territory, while India vehemently asserts its administrative control and the legitimacy of its population there. This dual claim creates a constant source of friction. Both nations maintain a strong military presence asserting their sovereignty, and China also disputes India's claim over the northeastern Ladakh region. Which further complicates things is also borders Pakistan, an area already contentious between India and Pakistan. It's just a geopolitical knot that seems almost impossible to untangle.
But why? Why are these seemingly remote, often uninhabitable, high-altitude areas so fiercely contested? What's the deep strategic, maybe even cultural importance that makes both nations cling to their claims so tightly?
That's a crucial question, and it's really all about strategic advantage and geopolitical control, often with deep historical roots. Take the Doklam Plateau, for instance. Now, technically it's claimed by Bhutan, but its relevance to the broader Sino-Indian border disputes is immense. It oversees this high vantage point that offers a strategic choke point, connecting the Indian subcontinent to areas like eastern Bangladesh via the narrow Siliguri corridor or Chicken's Neck. Control over points like that offers significant strategic advantage observation, potential military positioning, leverage over regional access, you name it. For China, Thaw and Arunachal Pradesh is particularly crucial. It's due to its profound importance for Tibetan Buddhism. It's home to a major monastery, a focal point for Tibetan cultural identity outside Tibet itself. China fears that the Dalai Lama, who's currently in exile in India, could potentially use Tawang as a base or thimble to galvanize Tibetans to try and declare independence from China. This fear drives China's intense claim over the region. They see it as essential to maintaining their firm control over Tibet.
Right. And from India's perspective, what are the primary concerns regarding these border areas beyond just, territorial integrity?
Well, India is equally concerned about the allegiance and loyalty of the rural populations in these remote, often isolated border areas. There's a tangible fear that these communities, perhaps feeling neglected or disconnected, might shift their allegiance towards China, especially given China's active and, frankly, well-funded efforts to win over its own border villages. Beijing offers significant housing subsidies, financial benefits, improved infrastructure to its citizens living along the LAC. They're effectively creating model villages right up to the contested line.
Wow.
So consequently, both countries are actively competing to build up cellular and digital connectivity, roads, other infrastructure in these areas. The goal is clear: gain the loyalty and integration of the local communities by demonstrating commitment to their development and asserting administrative presence. This competition really highlights the human element of the border dispute. The hearts and minds of the local populations are very much a battlefield.
And this isn't just historical stuff. These tensions are very current and have had tragic consequences. We saw that huge escalation in 2020 along the Ladakh demarcation, specifically in the Galwan Valley, right at the intersection of Ladakh, Tibet, and Xinjiang. It culminated in the death of at least 20 Indian troops and 4 Chinese soldiers. Those were the first fatalities from border disputes in that area in over 45 years. It was just a stark, brutal reminder of how quickly these simmering disputes can turn deadly.
Indeed, the Galwan Valley clash was a watershed moment, a real turning point. And it wasn't a firefight, interestingly. It was brutal hand-to-hand combat, using improvised weapons, reflecting the standing agreement that troops along the LAC don't use firearms. This unprecedented violence marked a severe downturn in relations. And unfortunately, minor border clashes, often involving patrolling troops and physical altercations, they've continued since that incident. It indicates the underlying tensions remain acutely high. Now, while the two countries did reach an agreement in October 2024 to end a specific military standoff and enhance communication channels, most analysts, like Tanvi Madan from Brookings, widely see it as more of a tactical thaw, a temporary de-escalation rather than a fundamental strategic shift in their relationship. China has consistently tried to compartmentalize these border issues, aiming to continue business and trade as usual despite the military tensions. But India has been reluctant to do so. They emphasize that a return to normal relations just can't happen without a satisfactory and verifiable resolution to the border disputes. It really highlights their differing approaches to managing the conflict and, well, a deep-seated mistrust, geopolitical maneuvering, and regional influence.
Okay, so moving beyond the immediate borders, another significant point of contention and a long-standing challenge for India is China's all-weather strategic cooperative partnership with Pakistan. This relationship really came into focus following that 2025 terrorist attack in India-administered Kashmir and the subsequent 4-day military conflict between India and Pakistan. What makes this alliance so problematic for India?
Well, the depth and the strategic implications of this partnership are truly profound for India. China is Pakistan's dominant and most reliable arms supplier. It provides a wide array of advanced military hardware, cutting-edge fighter jets like the JF-17 Thunder, which they co-produce, sophisticated drones, advanced air defense systems, naval vessels. In fact, in 2024 alone, China supplied an overwhelming 81% of Pakistan's major arms imports. It really solidifies its role as Pakistan's primary defense partner.
81%. Wow.
Yeah. And furthermore, the two countries cooperate extensively on nuclear arms development. That's a particularly sensitive area, adding another critical layer of strategic concern for India, which, faces nuclear-armed adversaries on both its western and northern fronts. According to analysts like Sushan Singh, this defense partnership presents a severe two-front dilemma for India.
Two-front dilemma.
Right. This means that in the event of an armed conflict with Pakistan, India fears China could provide substantial moral, material, logistics support to Pakistan. Or even more critically, in a scenario of a collaborative threat, either China or Pakistan could activate a second front militarily in a coordinated manner. That would force India to divide its forces and contend with threats from both its western and northern borders simultaneously, stretching its military resources to the absolute limit. It's a constant strategic nightmare for Delhi.
And I remember reading that Chinese embassy officials themselves have candidly described Tibet as a thorn in China-India relations. Why is that such a persistent and sensitive issue? How has it evolved?
Yeah, it's a deeply rooted issue. To understand it, you need to connect it to the bigger picture of China's internal security and India's, humanitarian commitments. It stems fundamentally from China's occupation and annexation of Tibet in 1950, which Beijing views as integral territory, non-negotiable. Then, following a major Tibetan revolt against the Chinese Communist Party in 1959, India provided refuge to the Dalai Lama, the spiritual leader of Tibetan Buddhism, and tens of thousands of other Tibetans. This act of humanitarian welcome has always been viewed by China with deep suspicion. They see India as potentially harboring a secessionist movement. Now, while India previously maintained a pretty cautious diplomatic stance, largely avoiding direct challenges to China's sovereignty claims over Tibet, there's been a noticeable shift in recent years. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has directly addressed the Dalai Lama on his birthday, signaling a departure from past diplomatic reticence, acknowledging his spiritual authority. Furthermore, senior Indian officials have openly supported the Dalai Lama's assertion that China will not be involved in his succession. That directly contradicts Beijing's firm stance and its attempts to control the process for political leverage.
That's quite a direct challenge.
It is. It's a significant move, asserting India's independent position on a deeply sensitive issue for China. Interestingly, though, amidst these tensions, there was a small step taken in June 2025 to sort of mend disputes in Tibet. The Kailash Manasarovar pilgrimage, a revered religious event that crosses through Tibetan territory, it resumed after a 5-year pause following the border conflict. So it shows that even thorny issues can sometimes see tentative pathways to, well, limited cooperation.
It also seems China has been actively expanding its influence across South Asia, hasn't it? Cultivating economic and diplomatic ties with India's neighbors, creating a sort of strategic encirclement or that string of pearls idea around India.
That's precisely right. The goal behind this extensive outreach is clearly to gain significant influence over the Indian subcontinent and its surrounding maritime regions, thereby constraining India's regional power. Countries like Bhutan, the Maldives, Nepal, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, they've all seen increased Chinese engagement, often through substantial infrastructure investments as part of the Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI. Take the Maldives, for instance, strategically located along critical oil shipping routes from the Persian Gulf. It has increasingly tilted toward China since joining the BRI in 2014, becoming a key node in Beijing's maritime strategy. Now, while the Maldives did elect a pro-China president in 2024 and even expelled Indian military personnel, observers noted a subtle shift in tone when the island nation welcomed Prime Minister Modi for a state visit on its Independence Day in July 2025.
Interesting. So it's not always a one-way street.
Exactly. It suggests that while China's influence is undeniable, the alignment of these smaller nations isn't always linear or exclusive. India, in turn, is acutely aware of this. They view it as a direct challenge to their traditional sphere of influence and a tactic to project Chinese power right into the Indian Ocean.
And India, predictably, has been a staunch critic of China's massive Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI, particularly its flagship $60 billion China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC. That's the one meant to connect China to Pakistan's Gwadar port. What's at the core of India's strong opposition there?
Well, the primary reason is quite straightforward but profoundly strategic. CPEC passes directly through the Pakistan-occupied portion of Kashmir, a territory that India considers its own. So from India's perspective, Indian officials view this route as a direct and unacceptable violation of India's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Full stop. It's not just an economic project in their eyes, it's a geopolitical encroachment. It legitimizes Pakistan's control over disputed territory and extends Chinese infrastructure into a highly sensitive zone. This project, and the broader BRI, really underscores China's priority: establish regional and eventual global dominance through massive, often debt-financed investments in developing countries. And this strategy is in sharp contrast with India's aim for a multipolar system, where no single power achieves such extensive global control. India sees these investments not merely as benevolent development aid, but as tools of influence that could undermine its own regional standing, increase debt dependency in neighboring countries, and potentially facilitate military access for Beijing in strategic locations. It's a fundamental clash of grand strategies. The economic battleground?
Okay, let's shift to economics. The scale of disparity here is pretty significant, isn't it? China's economy is about 5 times larger than India's in nominal terms, though yes, India is widely recognized as the world's fastest-growing major economy. But that size difference, it's glaringly evident in their trade relationship.
It absolutely is. There's a persistent and frankly substantial trade imbalance between the two nations. India runs a colossal trade deficit with China. In 2024, for example, China exported a staggering $120 billion worth of goods to India: electronics, machinery, chemicals, you name it. In stark contrast, India's exports to China were just under $15 billion, mostly raw materials, agricultural products. This highlights a deep reliance on China within India's economy. India remains heavily dependent on China in global supply chains, especially for critical components and active pharmaceutical ingredients, APIs.
Right, the pharmaceutical link is huge.
It is. India's pharmaceutical sector, which is the world's leading exporter of generic drugs, relies heavily on these API imports from China. So this dynamic illustrates a complex interdependence. You have strategic rivalry existing alongside practical economic necessity. But this dependence creates a critical choke point for India. I mean, imagine a scenario where vital pharmaceutical ingredients or electronics components are suddenly curtailed. The economic, even national security implications would be immediate and severe. It forces India into difficult diplomatic calculations and reveals a real strategic vulnerability.
So to counter this reliance and maybe carve out its own economic niche, India launched its ambitious Make in India initiative back in 2014. The aim was to transform itself into a global tech manufacturing hub, a clear signal of intent. How has that initiative fared?
Well, it was definitely a direct and strategic attempt to attract foreign investment and boost domestic manufacturing. The initiative came with a suite of incentives, tax exemptions, streamlined bureaucracy, more liberal business regulations, all designed to make India an attractive alternative to China. And it has seen some notable successes. For example, in 2025, Apple made a significant move by relocating some of its iPhone production from China to India. That was a part of a broader diversification strategy. This shift has led to India now producing 20% of the company's iPhones. That's a substantial leap from just a few years prior. It demonstrates that targeted efforts can yield results and begin to reshape global supply chains.
20% is significant.
It is. And beyond Apple, other companies in electronics, automotive, defense sectors have also explored or committed to expanding manufacturing in India. It's a testament to India's potential, to draw in major international players looking for manufacturing alternatives and to leverage its vast talent pool.
But despite these efforts and some clear successes, what are the inherent challenges India faces in truly competing with China economically, especially in manufacturing scale and sophistication?
That's a critical question, really getting at India's long-term strategy and structural issues. Despite Make in India, India remains heavily reliant on China in global supply chains, particularly for crucial intermediate goods and raw materials across various industries. Furthermore, developing the necessary manufacturing specialization and comprehensive training for advanced sectors like cutting-edge tech, semiconductor fabrication, renewable energy components that will undoubtedly take considerable time. It needs massive capital investment and sustained policy commitment. India also faces challenges with infrastructure, land acquisition, and a more complex regulatory environment compared to China's, centralized system. And the data kind of reflects this challenge. More than a decade after Make in India began, the country's share of GDP generated by manufacturing actually dropped to below 14% in 2025.
It's dropped. Lower than when it started.
Yes, lower than when the initiative was formally announced. It really underscores the deep-seated structural hurdles, the complexity of competing with an established giant like China, and the long road ahead for India to truly rival China's manufacturing dominance.
Interestingly, external powers are playing a role here too. We hear about U.S. friendshoring efforts trying to shift global supply chains away from geopolitical rivals towards more allied nations. How is India positioned in this new economic landscape? Is it benefiting?
It's absolutely correct. And India has indeed benefited from these U.S. initiatives. They're driven by a desire to diversify supply chains and reduce reliance on, adversaries. A prime example is the 2022 CGPS and Science Act. That created a substantial $500 million fund specifically earmarked to invest in India's semiconductor industry.
$500 million.
Yeah, it's a significant boost for India's aspirations in advanced manufacturing. And it's a clear signal of U.S. strategic interest in bolstering India's technological capabilities. Beyond semiconductors, there are ongoing discussions and agreements in other critical sectors too: defense, clean energy aimed at fostering greater industrial cooperation. However, experts caution that while these efforts are promising and strategically important, the full benefits of these friendshoring initiatives, they're expected to materialize over time. It's a long-term play designed to gradually reshape global manufacturing landscapes and create resilient, trusted supply chains, rather than an immediate overhaul of global economic flows, military might, and strategic postures.
Okay, let's turn to military capabilities now. China possesses the world's largest military. India has the second largest, two formidable forces. But there's a significant difference in their budgets that points to differing capacities and priorities, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The scale of investment disparity here is truly telling. China's military budget significantly outstrips India's. Massively. In 2024, China's publicly announced budget totaled $231 billion. Compare that to India's $75 billion.
Huge difference.
It is. But it gets even more pronounced when you consider estimates from the U.S. Department of Defense. They suggest China's actual spending is somewhere between 40 to 90% higher than its public figures. That could place its real expenditure close to $400 billion.
Wow.
This massive financial commitment allows China to pursue ambitious modernization programs across all domains: land, air, sea, space, cyber, expanding its military reach globally. And this creates a substantial gap in capabilities that India constantly has to strategize around, particularly in areas like naval power projection and advanced aerospace tech. For instance, China's disproportionate spending in naval power allows it to project influence far into the Indian Ocean, directly challenging India's traditional maritime dominance in its own backyard. That's a particularly concerning strategic advantage for them.
And what about military technology itself? What's the comparison there? Is India catching up?
Well, China has achieved remarkably rapid technological breakthroughs. That's a direct result of its enormous, sustained investments in military modernization and indigenous R&D. This includes successfully developing domestic stealth fighter jets, like the J-20. That's a capability possessed by only a handful of the most advanced military powers globally. It demonstrates a significant leap in aerospace technology. China's also made massive strides in missile technology, cyber warfare, space capabilities. In contrast, India remains the world's second-largest weapons importer, after Ukraine. Now, India historically relied heavily on Russia for its arms supply. That's a legacy of the Cold War, but has recently sought to diversify its sources. It's striking significant deals with the U.S. and France for advanced platforms and technology. But this difference, indigenous capability versus reliance on imports for advanced weaponry, it's a crucial distinction. It highlights China's accelerating self-sufficiency and India's ongoing modernization challenges. While India is developing its own defense industrial base, it's still a long road to truly catch up to China's technological prowess.
So what does this military strength and technological disparity mean for their security postures towards each other? How do their differing views on the international order shape their defensive and offensive strategies?
Well, when we connect this to the broader global landscape, it directly reflects those fundamentally different views on the international order we talked about. China's security policy has historically been to compete aggressively with India for regional influence. The aim is to contain India's great power ambitions and assert its own dominance across Asia. This often manifests in military posturing along the LAC and naval deployments in the Indian Ocean. India, on the other hand, actively seeks a multipolar system. It believes power should be distributed among multiple major states, not concentrated in one. So in line with this, India meticulously aims to avoid entanglement in the U.S.-China rivalry, preferring to maintain strategic flexibility and independence. This means China views India as a competitor to be constrained and managed within a China-centric regional order, while India sees China as a powerful neighbor whose ambitions need to be balanced within a broader, more distributed international power structure. This fundamental philosophical difference, it underpins much of their military and diplomatic maneuvering.
India's approach to deterring Chinese aggression has often been called a multi-alignment strategy. What exactly does that entail? How does it play out in practice?
That's a good question. It gets at how a nation navigates these complex geopolitical waters without committing fully to one bloc. India's multi-alignment strategy involves strengthening relationships with a diverse range of countries that are also, frankly, wary of China's growing military and economic strength. A prime example is its active participation in the quadrilateral security dialogue alongside the United States, Australia, and Japan. Now, the Quad doesn't explicitly name China in its official statements, but unofficial conversations within the group consistently point to Beijing's aggressive actions, territorial claims in the South China Sea, military modernization, supplying Pakistan as causes for concern.
Right, it's the elephant in the room.
Pretty much. And China, predictably, has accused the Quad of being a tool the United States uses to contain China and perpetuate U.S. hegemony. That underscores Beijing's perception of the group as a direct challenge. But beyond the Quad, India has also meticulously maintained a special and privileged strategic partnership with Russia. That's for defense and energy coordination, a relationship predating many Western ties. India sees this as a strategic move to counterbalance Russia's increasing closeness with China, ensuring it retains leverage with different major powers and avoids over-reliance on any single partner. And domestically, India has significantly boosted its own defenses along the shared border with China. They committed $24 million in 2023 just to upgrade an airfield in disputed areas like Ladakh. That clearly signals its intent to defend its territorial claims through both diplomacy and robust military preparedness. It's a delicate balancing act, but one India believes is essential for its strategic autonomy. Leadership of the Global South.
Okay, another arena of competition. Both China and India aspire to be advocates and leaders of the Global South, that diverse group of developing countries facing shared challenges. This is a significant area of their geopolitical competition, but also one where they sometimes find common ground, right?
They do, yes. They are both founding members of BRICS, which originally included Brazil, Russia, South Africa, and has recently expanded. That demonstrates their early commitment to this group of emerging economies. India also joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SKO, a security and economic forum dominated by China and Russia back in 2017. And both President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Modi have publicly acknowledged their roles as important members of the Global South. They suggest a shared vision, at least rhetorically, often emphasizing themes like decolonization, self-determination, a more equitable international order. However, Their methods and underlying goals for influencing the Global South diverge significantly, and that transforms this shared aspiration into another arena of strategic competition.
So how do their strategies actually differ in practice? What's China's primary approach to winning friends and influence in these developing nations?
China really leverages its immense global economic presence, largely through massive infrastructure investments under the banner of the Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI. They use this to forge diplomatic ties and secure access to resources and markets. The strategy is designed to expand trade and development opportunities for partner nations, creating deep economic interdependence. Beijing offers extensive funding for ports, railways, roads, power plants, other critical infrastructure projects, which is highly appealing to nations in dire need of development capital. China also provides significant bilateral loans and offers technological expertise, often at a scale and speed that Western nations just can't match. It's a strategy heavily focused on tangible economic engagement, the promise of growth through connectivity. It positions China as a vital development partner and maybe a model for rapid economic transformation.
But these vast investments, they aren't without their critics, are they? There are significant concerns about the long-term implications, particularly regarding debt, the whole debt trap idea.
That's absolutely right. Observers, particularly in the West and some international financial institutions, warn of potential debt traps. This refers to a situation where unsustainable loans from China might lead to borrowing countries accumulating unmanageable debt. This could potentially give Beijing significant political, even military influence, or allow it to seize strategic assets if countries default. Sri Lanka is frequently cited as a cautionary example. After huge borrowings from China for projects like the Hambantota port, Sri Lanka defaulted on its national debt in 2022. This led to concerns about long-term control over its assets, as the port was eventually leased to a Chinese state-owned company for 99 years.
99 years.
Yeah. Now, Beijing refutes the debt trap narrative, claiming it merely offers a development alternative. But this highlights the double-edged nature of China's economic engagement, offering crucial development capital, yes, but also potentially creating geopolitical leverage for Beijing and raising questions about sovereignty.
And India's strategy. It seems to take a different path, perhaps one more attuned to its economic scale relative to China.
Indeed. India acknowledges that its economy, while rapidly growing, just cannot directly compete with Chinese investments in terms of sheer scale of capital or infrastructure projects. So instead, New Delhi influences the Global South by leveraging its diplomatic soft power, its historical role in the non-aligned movement, its democratic credentials. India focuses more on capacity building, technical assistance, and crucially, on opening doors for developing countries to negotiate and have their voices heard in international forums. A notable example happened during India's presidency of the G20 summit in 2023. India successfully proposed granting the African Union full membership in the G20. That was a significant move, accepted that same year, elevating the AU's status to parity with the European Union.
That's quite a diplomatic coup.
It was. It demonstrated India's commitment to elevating the standing and negotiating power of the Global South on the world stage. Using diplomatic influence and a shared history rather than just overwhelming economic might, it's a strategy that seeks to empower rather than simply invest in these nations. But, despite their distinct and often competing approaches, it's not always clear that the Global South sees either of them as an entirely benign leader or their undisputed champion. As Manjari Chatterjee Miller at CFR noted, developing countries often operate with a high degree of pragmatism. They accept assistance from wherever it comes without necessarily aligning entirely with one side or the other ideologically.
They play the field, so to speak.
Exactly. They understand the geopolitical game and are often adept at playing it, seeking to maximize their own benefits. The long-term effects of both countries' influence campaigns remain uncertain. The allegiances of the Global South are fluid, often shifting based on immediate needs and perceived advantages. The role of external powers, the United States.
Finally, we really can't fully understand the China-India dynamic without bringing in the significant influence of external powers, particularly the United States. Washington clearly views India as a critical partner in countering China's rise and a key player in its Indo-Pacific strategy. How has this partnership developed?
It's fascinating, actually, how India's strained relations with China have served as an important, almost catalytic driver for this U.S.-India partnership. It's grown significantly since the Cold War ended. The two are strategic partners. This cooperation spans multiple domains. They engage in the exchange and joint production of defense goods. There are ongoing discussions, for example, for producing advanced F-414 fighter jet engines in India, a significant transfer of sensitive technology.
Right, the jet engine deal was big news.
It was. And India is also a crucial member of the Quad Security Dialogue Group alongside the US, Australia, and Japan. As we said, the group avoids explicitly naming China, but unofficial conversations consistently point to Beijing's aggressive military expansion and assertiveness as a core concern. China, in turn, has vocally accused the Quad of being a tool the United States uses to contain China and perpetuate U.S. hegemony. That highlights Beijing's perception of the group as a direct challenge, a new form of Cold War-era alliance building.
However, recent U.S. actions have introduced a new layer of complexity, maybe even tension. Since Donald Trump's return to the White House in 2025, U.S. tariffs on Indian exports have certainly strained that decades-long effort to build a strong U.S.-India partnership. What exactly happened there?
That's a crucial development, yes. In July 2025, the Trump administration announced tariffs totaling an astonishing 50% on India. This included a 25% reciprocal tariff, justified by what Trump considered an unfair trade imbalance. He argued India's tariffs on U.S. goods were too high. And then, additionally, there was an extra 25% sanction tariff imposed specifically because of India's continued import of Russian oil during the Ukraine war, which Washington views as undermining sanctions against Moscow.
50% total tariffs, that's huge.
It is. These tariffs represent a significant economic pressure point, and they cause considerable friction in what had been an increasingly cooperative relationship, especially in defense and strategy.
And I understand this caused significant outrage in India, given the efforts to forge that alliance and India's role in the Indo-Pacific strategy.
That's putting it mildly. Indian media, strategic analysts express widespread outrage. They question the logic, the timing of such punitive measures against a key strategic partner. Alyssa Ayers at CFR noted, "People wonder why the United States would suddenly treat its close strategic partner worse than some of its toughest competitors." This sentiment highlighted a perceived betrayal, the potential damage to years of diplomatic and economic efforts. Many in Delhi felt Washington was undermining its own Indo-Pacific strategy by alienating a key partner at such a critical time. The move was widely seen as counterproductive to the broader goal of balancing China's influence.
So this leads to a critical question. What does this mean for the China-India relationship itself? Could these U.S. tariffs actually push India closer to China, potentially unraveling Washington's strategic goals?
It's a highly debated point among strategists right now. Some experts certainly argue that this spike in U.S.-India tensions could drive India's geopolitical reorientation, potentially pushing India closer to China. The thinking is, if a key partner like the U.S. imposes such punitive economic measures, India might reconsider its strategic alignments, maybe seek to de-escalate tensions with Beijing to maintain regional stability and economic security. However, others contend that any perceived thawing of China-India relations is more a reflection of India's broader, long-standing strategy. Maintain strategic autonomy, pursue a multipolar world order, not a direct consequence of U.S. actions. India meticulously aims to avoid entanglement in the U.S.-China rivalry, balancing relationships with multiple global powers.
Stick to its own path.
Exactly. India's history of non-alignment, its deep-seated mistrust of China. It suggests any rapprochement would be carefully calibrated, unlikely to represent a fundamental shift in allegiance.
And there was a significant meeting recently that occurred precisely in this context, wasn't there? Adding more fuel to this debate.
Yes, exactly. This debate gained significant prominence in August 2025. Indian Prime Minister Modi traveled to China for the first time in 7 years to meet President Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the SDO summit. During this high-profile meeting, both leaders made general commitments to improve ties. Notably, they referred to each other as partners rather than rivals, trying to stabilize their often fraught relationship. And this high-level engagement occurred precisely in the immediate aftermath of those significant U.S. tariffs. It provided concrete evidence for both interpretations of India's strategic moves either being pushed towards China or simply asserting its independent foreign policy. There's one alternative perspective, though, offered by Kenneth Juster, former U.S. ambassador to India. It's quite thought-provoking. He suggested that these high U.S. tariffs, rather than being purely punitive or just about trade imbalances, could potentially be a complex negotiating tactic.
A negotiating tactic aimed at what?
Well, the aim in this view could be to achieve a comprehensive trade deal with India that benefits both nations. Or, perhaps even more complexly, to pressure India into a peace agreement concerning the Ukraine conflict, given India's continued import of Russian oil, which indirectly funds Russia's war effort. This interpretation adds another layer of complexity to understanding the true intent and potential long-term outcomes of U.S. policy. It suggests the tariffs might be a means to an end, rather than an end in themselves. Concluding thoughts for the listener.
So after all this, What does it mean for you, watching this extraordinarily complex dynamic unfold between these two giants, each treading its own course for the 21st century?
Well, when we connect it all back to the broader global landscape, the interplay between China and India is huge. Two nuclear-armed, rapidly growing powers with fundamentally competing geopolitical ambitions. It has profound ramifications for regional stability, global trade flows, the future international relations, the trajectory of the global south. Their deep historical ties, those persistent contentious borders, intense economic competition, and differing visions for global order, it all creates a delicate, often precarious balance. Understanding this intricate equilibrium and how external powers like the U.S. influence it with their own strategic interests and economic policies, it's absolutely crucial for grasping the geopolitical landscape of the coming decades. Ultimately, the profound question for you, our listener, isn't just whether China and India will cooperate or conflict, but perhaps whether their fundamentally irreconcilable visions for global order, one seeking regional hegemony, the other multipolarity, can never truly coexist peacefully. Or if their friction is simply the defining geopolitical reality of the coming decades, shaping a world where constant tension is, well, the new normal. Outro.
And that brings us to the end of our exploration into the complex and continuously evolving relationship between China and India. Thank you so much for joining us today.
We truly hope this discussion has provided you with valuable and nuanced insights into the dynamics shaping this critical part of the world and its global repercussions.
Thank you, everyone, for your time and participation.
Mhm.
If you found this discussion informative, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to the Global WarWatch Network. Also, we'd love to hear your thoughts, so please share them in the comments section below. You can also join us on social media. The links are provided in the description.